The most expensive CEO mistake often happens before the search begins. The board starts discussing who it wants before agreeing on what the business needs to really accomplish that next stage of growth. So, welcome to the People Strategy Forum. I'm Sam Reeve, CEO of CompTeam, and your host. This show helps founders, executives, and senior HR leaders create workplaces through people-centered rewards, clear talent strategy, and stronger leadership. And today, we're examining one of the most consequential decisions an organization can make, defining the CEO that the organization's future actually requires. And our guest today is Tom Verboven, the Senior Director at Mercer that really defines the global human capital space where executive experience, we really look for that strong executive experience and leadership, defining what that is. And he is Mercer with organizations across the world. So Tom has lived and worked across Europe, the Middle East, and the United States. His experience includes executive assessment, team dynamics, change leadership, and cultural transformation. But today's conversation is primarily about conducting the work that happens before the executive search starts. Really understanding what are the common capabilities, the behaviors, the relationships that the next CEO will need to be successful to take the organization to its next stage. So Tom, welcome. I'm looking forward to digging into this conversation.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
So Tom, let's begin with your own journey. And I'd love to dig into this with our speakers. You've advised leaders and organizations across industries, cultures, countries, all over the world, of course. What experiences first sparked your passion in understanding what it takes for executives to truly thrive in their seats?
So I always wanted to become a professional basketball player, actually. That's my first. Didn't work out, unfortunately, but that's what also triggered my interest, because the coaching, the team culture, etc. And then I was wondering why you have some teams with maybe not the best players who then perform much better. And so that triggered my whole interest in leadership, team dynamics, the behavioral side of humans, basically.
Yeah, it's fascinating how sports, there's so much passion in the game, right? When people are playing or in that stage of play, that that those true behavioral characteristics come out, that true leadership characteristics, working with others effectively, really making that team gel. So yeah, I'm not surprised that you said that, but it's definitely something that brings a great parallel to business.
Yeah, I also also an incident in which is also usually great examples and also big failures in that part of the business story sports.
So tell me, Tom, when you meet with your clients for the first time, how are they typically thinking about what do they typically get wrong? I guess we could say, as far as when they're thinking for a new CEO. Often, organizations are in a state of panic. The CEO is either left unexpectedly or they are clearly off tracks and they need to figure out how to get back on track. So what do you often see?
Yeah. So we often see, if it's CEO recruitment, most of the time either they didn't do the succession planning really well. So we also see from research that if you have to force to look for a new CEO, it doesn't do well on the financial side of your business. So most of the time it's like a lack of good succession planning. The thing is there is a lack of pre and post. I know this is focused about the pre side of starting to understand what successful CEO looks like or what is needed for the future. But also post is important, right? How do we coach the CEO? How do we set him or her up for success? Because there's a new CEO, there's a new group dynamic. So how do we work on the team, etc.? So both pre and post, there are a lot of gaps. And even in the middle, when we assess CEOs, but of course then we have the need of course, a very good look at what is needed. Also there, because compare sometimes, and we know that selecting the new CEO is probably the most critical decision board members have to take in their life. No? And if we see how they are assessed sometimes, there's less depth or robustness than we sometimes look at graduates straight from university. Sometimes they need to go through 2 days of assessment and role plays and interviews and cognitive tests and business simulations, etc. 2 days is maybe the extreme end, but there's a lot of scrutiny, right? And then the CEO, which is the riskiest business decision you need to take, sometimes it's mind-blowing that it's just like an informal panel discussion with board member, because they have that experience, so they've been CEO somewhere else and they can do it again. So there's it's a bit mind-blowing that there's such a difference in how they select the CEO, and then let alone how little rigor there is in reflecting what is needed to be successful in their specific.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, there's a whole sequence, or we have to look at the pre and post and everything in between. So if you have to articulate the steps and stages of a proper CEO search and putting them into action, what does that look like? What are the steps?
So the first step is have a very, very good look at what is the strategy, what is your vision or the future. That's the first one. And should always be the starting point. Here we assume that we look outside. That means you don't have maybe the talent pool internally to make it happen. And looking in that success profile of a CEO is it needs time. And we should spend time, because if you don't do that well, then how are you even going to select, interview, assess? And then you're just shooting for the wrong target. So that part is probably the most critical part of the whole process. And that needs sometimes very honest, maybe heated discussions. You have very good examples. It's an old example, but I think it's very still good. So I worked for IBM, and back in the 90s, Lou Gerstner, he was one of the first non-technical person they hired. And it was because a couple of directors in the board challenged the fact that they need an engineer, an IT person, and that they need a more commercial person. So they hired someone from the food industry, Lou Gerstner, extremely successful. But there were heated discussions to go ahead with that, because the traditional board members all wanted to have a technology guy or lady to get in the board. So they had a very challenging discussions, like a heated debate on who is next. For IBM, it turned out really well. He turned the company totally around with his commercial mindset. I don't know the numbers by heart, but I think they had 3 billion loss. He turned it out to 8 billion in profitability. So he did really well. To have that discussion. And then, of course, you go into what is needed. Does he or she needs to come from the same industry? Does he or she needs to have the CEO experience? Yes or no? What kind of behavior? What culture do we need? Right? Because culture is also extremely important. And also there you have great examples of failure. Like, for example, Boeing, where you had at a certain point, like a guy called Calhoun, who entered. He was also there, an example of a non-engineer coming in Boeing, big engineering company, aircraft manufacturing, etc. And he came from GE, he didn't embrace the culture of safety, quality, with all the bad consequences afterwards. So that's a bad example. So all those reflections, there's so much to discuss to have it right. And the board needs to also to be aligned and have the buy-in before you even start about thinking about the success profile. So that part is extremely important. And then of course you have to think about what's the process. Yeah, you're going to source a couple of candidates, but how do we going to assess them? Who's going to be involved? Do we involve all board members, some board members? Do we involve an external partner? Yes, no. What kind of tools we're going to use? What kind of exercises we're going to use? So you have a clear process. So it's very structured, rigorous, data-driven.
Yes, and so the first piece, as you mentioned, is really understanding the criteria which we need to measure the candidates against, understanding, as you said, where the organization is heading, the culture, the types of behaviors, making sure that there's the right criteria for the fit for the future. Then comes the assessment piece. After you've identified a number of candidates, then of course you have to assess them. And what is the process that you use to assess candidates to see if they meet the needs of the organization?
So it depends what comes out of that success profile. So that's the starting point. So it always starts from, again, strategy. Out of the strategy comes what is needed. How is that translated into what kind of culture you want? How is that translated in values? How is that translated in behaviors you expect from a CEO? And maybe also about the technical experience, critical experience. Did they go through digital transformation? Do they have M&A experience, etc.? So they're kind of critical experience, and that should be very clear in your success profile. And based on that, you're going to decide, okay, how do we going to assess all those behaviors and critical experiences? So for example, just making things up here, but if strategic thinking is very key, then we're going to look in how can we measure them? Yeah, can we measure that maybe with cognitive tool? So people are very reluctant to do that, but cognitive helps in how does a person think, connecting the dots, pattern recognition, abstract thinking, etc. Maybe we do a business case. Maybe just through an interview, maybe business simulations. So, but the key rule of thumb is always that if you measure, for example, strategy, that you should have 2 or 3 data points to measure it. For example, say cognitive, business case, and interview. And so then it's a very robust, data-driven, evidence-based approach of assessing a CEO. So that's how it normally works.
Okay, and is there a particular do you use a proprietary tool for this, or is it what helps with that decision, or making sure that there's alignment there? Is there a scoring?
Yeah, so very good question. So typically, if we use psychometrics or cognitive tools, we always use tools that are reliable and valid. What we typically look at, the gold standard is BPS, is the British Psychology Society. So where we have high reliability tools. At Mercer, we use our own proprietary tools, but we are also open for other good psychometrics. As long as they're valid and reliable, you can use them. And sometimes it's also depending the region, right? So maybe for a proprietary tool here in the Middle East with their loan groups, etc. Maybe another tool is better for another region or for certain industries, or etc. So that's how we think about it.
So let's just dig into that a little bit. So you mentioned that for different locations, perhaps you should use different tools. Is that because certain tools are inherently biased to a particular location or culture?
Yes, and also because, for example, we have a tool that was developed in the Middle East. We have a lot of leaders that completed that. Also, our leadership is very strong in the Middle East. And maybe other tools don't have that, or even training Rubik is a bit less level, but still, I mean, the different languages you have to see, because you have some very strong cognitive tools that travel less well, where English is the main language. So yeah, it depends what kind of models are used in that tool, and where it's strong or not.
Okay.
So that's definitely a dimension we want to look into.
All right. So we've kind of discussed the pre-stage. What does it take to the needs of the organization, and what does a candidate look like for the future? We're gone through our sourcing a bit. We've identified a few candidates to assess. We've done the assessment. Now, a lot of leaders out there are saying, "Well, how has the new dynamic in the world changed? In the past few years, there's been the onset of artificial intelligence and having those types of tools. Do those tools belong in this the stage of assessing a CEO in any way?"
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's not a straightforward answer. So, in theory, we can use AI to run a complete, thorough assessment without any human assessor intervention. That's in theory, of course, because we also need to look at the experience, right? I think at least as a leader, you still want to have that interaction. Oh, it's a two-way street. You want to feel what kind of organization you have. You want to feel the organization, you want to talk to board members. It's a two-way street. But in principle, like for example, a business case you can do through an AI tool. Rule of thumb is always that there's a human in the loop who assesses afterwards, look at the recording, etc. You can do role play with AI. We have these avatars who are really strong, and they throw out a score on your strategic thinking, communication, etc. But it's still a bit dangerous when it comes to pure recruitment, because it's basically the algorithm is a bit of a black box, so it should be defensible. So for definitely for CEO recruit, I would not use any AI tool as we speak. Maybe next year, if we have a conversation, maybe I will change my mind. But for now, I wouldn't recommend it. I think if you go more to the volume recruitment, you can use some tools, but again, with ethical rigor that they're not biased, that they're defensible, so you know how the algorithm works, etc. So still be very careful. But at the CEO level, I wouldn't do that. I think it's going to be a bad experience for the CEO.
Okay.
Although some of those AI tools are pretty fun in like a business simulation exercise, but still it's a decision, right? So both from a candidate experience you want to have, and you want to have a conversation, right?
Right. Got it. So a leadership transition creates both an opportunity and a risk for an organization. So a company may need significant change, but it also has strengths, relationships, cultural qualities that they cannot afford to lose as part of their strategic advantage. So how should a board distinguish between what the CEO must preserve in the next stage of growth versus what needs to be changed?
Yeah. Yeah, again, very good question, Sam. It's a bit of a paradox, no? So do they come with this bold vision, but still like respect the legacy? Yeah. And also they're good and bad example. Bad example, for example, is the guy, I think Ron Johnson was his name. He came from Apple, went to GC Penny, and he just copy-paste the Apple way of doing without listening to the customer, the store shop from GC Penny. So similar. You have good examples, for example, Burberry, where you had this lady, I think what's her name? Adams. She came from I think she came from retail, but maybe not from the luxury business. What she did, she kept the brand, but she focused on the heritage, the craftsmanship, the luxury aspect. So there was a kind of combination from keep the core of the culture, but give it a twist. So I think it's that navigation, and they need to be open. But keeping, unless you say we need to change our culture, but it's not working, then that's a different story.
Right. So So as we talked about, of course, the sourcing, the pre-work, and the sourcing, the bringing the candidate or identify the candidate, assessing that candidate. But now we're into onboarding, the onboarding phase, and so when we bring in the new CEO into the business, what needs to happen to ensure that that CEO is going to be successful? We kind of touched on the basis of identifying those things that are working, such it could be that you have a strong culture, those things that have been successful and not rocking the boat there. So what needs to happen when that CEO comes in the door?
Yeah. Onboarding is extremely important. So a couple of things that need to happen. First of all, what we see is external recruitments. The new CEO misses that internal network. No? They don't have the network to rely on. They don't know who to reach out. They don't know who are the formal leaders. Formal leaders is pretty clear, but who are the people who need to influence? So ideally, you do have a mentor who can help you to navigate that, let's say, internal politics. That's very helpful. I would say if you can get a coach, bring them on board, especially in the beginning, let them work out. The first 90, 100 days are extremely important. So let them work out a plan, get the buy-in of that plan. So that's very important. But also and then it depends what it is. Maybe they come from a very different industry. Maybe you can help an industry person to also navigate and better understand how the industry works. And there is the whole team aspect, because the disease is going to change the dynamics of a team. So a lot of work on alignment, team dynamics, and making sure that everyone is set up for success.
Okay, so I heard a couple things there. You mentioned that to really set up a group of advisors, one being an internal mentor or key stakeholder that can really ensure that the CEO knows and meets the right people at the right timing. Then you mentioned the identification of a coach that can help that CEO be successful, remove barriers, and come up with a good plan. And then also an industry expert, if the CEO is coming from outside the industry, to ensure that they have, once again, another coach to ensure that they are informed and know the details of that industry specifically.
Or the ex-CEO can also help, but that's a bit of a might be sensitive if depends what happened before, but also risk that there will be too much involved, etc. But it depends the situation, but it also might be a solution. Just more her for success.
Okay. Now we're going through that onboarding process, but then, of course, the board expects results. Is there a way that the board should frame these results? When should they expect to see certain change? What happens if things aren't going the way that they see? I mean, let's kind of dig into that as far as the pressure testing of this new CEO in the new environment.
That's why it's so important to set up that 100 days plan, right? Where you get buy-in from what the plans are. Because what you see, and that's another paradox that these new CEOs have to deal with, is they expect the new CEO to make decisions quickly. But on the other hand, you need to take your time to know the culture, to understand what works, what doesn't work, to talk to your stakeholders, get buy-in. So that's a bit the paradox they need to work on. But regular communication, clarity on the plan, on expectation, alignment on what exactly is meant by all the strategy, etc. It's extremely important. Because what we also see now, and that's also difference between external CEO and internal. So what we see is the internal stay a bit longer than I think average is 8.5 years that they stay on board, while an external is 7.2 or something, and in that niche. So external stay less long and have a higher percentage of probability to be fired as well. So setting them up for success is extremely important.
Yeah, that really shows the importance of proper succession planning in these situations.
Yeah.
So just kind of move into the succession planning topic. So there's certain situations where, of course, the organization is looking for transformational change, something that's different than what they've been to ensure that they're successful. And as I imagine in that case, they're looking for maybe an external candidate. So can you kind of define what are the criteria or the situations that would favor an internal versus an external candidate?
There's some pros and cons. In the majority of cases, I'm still in favor of internal promotion because it shows also trust to the potential, the talent you have. If you do succession planning in a structured way, then you can also much better prepare people for that CEO position. Internal candidates have their internal network. But like you said, sometimes it's better just to also go external because you need that fresh eye, and that's what the business needs. So depends the situation. It can be sometimes favorable to go to external candidate rather than an internal one.
Makes sense. All right. Well, as we've gone through this full journey, I mean, we talked about the pre-work that needs to be done, the assessment phase, the selection, and then finally the onboarding. Is there anything that we're missing here?
Not necessarily, no. I think it's also important for the onboarding and then the whole follow-up and making sure that that's an ongoing process, right? So you have to keep on working on that coaching, individual development of the CEO. You have to work on that team, board member dynamics. That it cannot be a one, like a standalone. It's a continuous process, right? Like you mentioned AI. I mean, the industry, the world is changing so fast that it's constant. It's a never-ending journey for a CEO, for a board, for an organization, as you know.
Yes. All right. Well, what are as we're kind of wrapping up here, what is the one thing that you want to ensure that our leaders are thinking about in this conversation? So many of them are perhaps founders of organizations, and others are chief people officers that may have to oversee this transition. So what is the key thing that you want them to walk away with?
Robustness, I would say. Robustness in taking your time in really understanding what is needed for the future. So the success profile, reading that maybe tough discussion, and also robustness in the assessment, in the selection. Take your time, make sure that you understand, have different data points, and then. So for me, it's the depth, it's the robustness, it's embedded in data, in science. Try to avoid as much as possible. Maybe not intuition. Intuition is also part, but eliminate bias as much as possible.
Right. Well, I think that's super important what you mentioned there. I mean, already that's just the fact that a CEO is leaving the organization and you have to find a new one, and that the amount of business interruption and risk to the organization is significant. The cost is significant, and so
Significant.
we don't want to.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
1 trillion.
$1 trillion.
So 1 trillion is wiped out of the MP 1,500 every year due to bad transition of CEOs. That's in Harvard Business Study, I think from 2021. But yeah, that's that's kind of the because it's not only the financial of losing the money for a search firm or whatever. You lose time, you lose the morale of the company, the stock, the reputation. There's the missing of innovation, the momentum you're missing. There's so many elements that play in here. Yeah, so it's extremely important decision.
Yeah, that is it.
So spend your time. It's like buying a new company, right? You do your due diligence. You just don't buy a company based on your gut feeling.
That's right. Well, Tom, thank you. I know that for our listeners out there, Tom has helped us reframe CEO succession, and it's a really business design decision, not simply a hiring decision. The organization must first understand its strategic position. What are the things that make this next stage successful? What the CEO must deliver and decide upon when they come in the door is quite critical. So we've gone through the steps of the pre-work that needs to happen, the assessment, and then the onboarding. And so I hope that everyone listening has got some good bits out of this conversation today. But thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me.
So for our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, please ensure that you share it with a friend or in this case, perhaps maybe another board member, and to ensure that they really look for this next CEO for their organization effectively, and take time doing the assessment, assessing of the business, and then the assessment of the candidate before deciding what is the right candidate to move forward with, because the stakes are high, as you all know. We don't want to rush the decision and create further damage to the organization. But for our listeners, we'll see you next week on the People Strategy Forum. So take care.